Welcome to Through Your Looking Glass, a podcast that explores the world of research technology. Combining speed and insights, ResTech reflects a deeper knowledge of the people around us. We're leading the conversation about this complex industry, which spans from traditional market research to advertising, media measurement, and beyond. Join us as we chat with experts and enthusiasts in the ResTech community and learn more about its evolution, application, and ever-growing potential.
Welcome. My name is Patrick Comer. I'm the founder and CEO of Lucid. And on this episode of Through Your Looking Glass, I am thrilled to be engaging with the one and the only Jeremy King, the founder and CEO of Attest. So, Jeremy, welcome to the podcast here. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here and pleasure to speak as always.
I always like talking to you, Jeremy, because you actually follow American football. You actually know the NFL. So I always feel like I'm at home when talking sport with you versus most folks in our London office have no clue what's happening with the Super Bowl.
Well, I'm a bit of a cheat in that I sound British, but I have all American family and an Australian wife. So I follow pretty much all sports. I'm a Bears fan. So this was not a particularly fun year for the Bears, but it was fun to watch the rest of the teams play out and have wonderful years and seasons. So sad it's over. Looking forward to next season now.
Does that mean you have an Australian football team as well?
Yes, I support the Hawthorn Hawks, who I'm sure are famous in New Orleans.
They're very famous in New Orleans, but I'm sure that the Lucid Sydney team will love to hear that.
Yeah, or they probably won't actually. That's a Melbourne team.
There it is. Again, so excited to have you here. Thrilled for you to be on this show, particularly because of how your business has evolved and your role that you're playing in ResTech and in the overall insight space, and how Attest is really changing the landscape of what's possible. So just so our listeners can get a better understanding, love to hear more about you, some of your background, and how you got into this glorious industry in of itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think I'm necessarily in the industry, in that I'm interested in the industry, but 90% plus of what we do is nothing to do with the industry. Originally, I'm a scientist. I worked in genetics. I worked in ecology. I published some interesting stuff about how baby reef fish grow up and how that's driven by sound using mathematical models of animal behavior, which is quite fun. I then spent 9 years at McKinsey, which is a big strategy consulting firm. I worked in over 25 different countries. I spent 2 years at Harvard Business School, and I'm sort of deep down, I'm a fan of entrepreneurship and tech. And that's what led to the start of Attest.
Yeah.
We exist to give everyone confidence for every decision, and we do that by making consumer research ridiculously easy and open to anyone. But interested in the industry, yes. In the industry, sometimes.
So I like this dichotomy of being interested versus, quote, in. So how do you play the difference in terms of how you engage with customers or how you talk about that with your team?
Yeah, I think we're certainly ResTech in that, we are a technology company that lets people do research. But I think ResTech is a much bigger and broader opportunity in the industry than it might initially appear. We do that by building a model that is for anyone to use, in that my personal view is that if only we could make research, ResTech, open to more people to do more things more often, then the world of research and the world of ResTech would be a much bigger one. And that's how we were born as a company. That's what we believe in, and that's what we're doing. So we do that with a SaaS business model with lots of modern and state-of-the-art architecture and techniques. But what it means is the majority of the time we aren't in the research industry. We're interested in the many moving parts, but most of the time and most of our clients have nothing to do with it, which is quite fun. And that's really the whole point of why we exist.
Yeah, I love that answer because at Lucid, we talk about the democratization of questions and answers, providing access to that capability to anyone and everyone on the planet. And it seems like from a culture standpoint, from a value standpoint, we're very much aligned in that.
Completely, in that, the vast majority of people in the world are not market researchers, but most people do need market research. They just don't use or produce or receive it when they want to. And that's why the market, in my view, should be 10, 25, 50 times larger. And I think it's the power of software and software business models that can open us up more and make the previously impossible suddenly possible. I think that's what's exciting about software and about SaaS, and that's what's adding the tech to the res to make res tech.
The tech to the res to make res tech. Genius. That's well done. So how did you get to this point where you're, Harvard Business School, McKinsey, writing about coral fish? I think I got that right. What's the little bit of story, the moment where providing, access to insights to everyone becomes part of your passion play?
Yeah, I think as a scientist, I'm trained to follow every thread, to explore every hypothesis. That's what I feel as though progress is. That's the scientific method. And I think that's what businesses should be doing all the time. Many businesses who are very successful do work that way. Many other businesses don't work that way and also exist for some time. But deep down, I think I kind of feel a sense of obligation to test things, learn things constantly, iterate, try, find, fail, don't go there again, try somewhere else. That's how science works, and sharing it openly is a big part of that. I think in my time at McKinsey, what I saw was it's really easy to get data about your business, the way it exists. It's also increasingly easy to get data about your existing customers, their web journeys, their feedback, their CX. This is done really nicely in many places. What's hard is to get data about the customers you don't have yet, the ones that you need to know in order to grow, the ones that you wish you understood more. That's where research is powerful. Any show like Shark Tank in the US or Dragon's Den in the UK starts with, we went to the market research and we discovered an opportunity. I just wish that could happen in more places and more often. And I think, times at McKinsey where I was trying to launch a company from Europe into South America, I was trying to figure out how are Brazilians different from Bolivians? What would make old Argentinians switch their retail bank account? There was no answer to this question, and it was really difficult to start. And I thought there must be an easier way. And it turns out doing that with SaaS business models and tech makes it easier for many people. And that's what we're all about at Attest.
So it sounds like one of the cool things that folks listening would really understand is that it's getting easier and easier to ask questions of, I think you called it the customers you don't have yet, which is a really nice way of framing it. Because I think most, if I'm, for example, if I've got a list of my customers, in theory, I could send them an email. But the concept that I can now actually ask people who don't even know that my brand exists or are detractors from my brand and working with my competitors, the fact that it becomes really simple and easy and iterative is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it should be just as easy as surveying your existing customers. Why not? Why shouldn't it be? You should be able to learn about your competitors' customers. You need to give them good reasons to give you responses, and you need to make that secure, and you need to make that easy for them and easy for you to start. But, that's what tech makes easy. And suddenly those two activities that used to be one is easy, one is hard, there's no reason they should both, be different. They can both be easy. And that unlocks all sorts of exciting new things.
For those unfamiliar with the SaaS-based subscription models, let's talk about how that works or doesn't work in the research industry. I think it may sound silly, but sometimes it's good just to define what SaaS means. So I guess the first question, how do you correlate SaaS, its definition, and what Attest does as a business?
So SaaS, software as a service, it needs to be software that does something. It typically comes with some sort of recurring revenue model. It's typically very easy to buy. It's typically very easy to use. Tools like Zoom, that's SaaS. Things like Google Docs, that's SaaS. Things like Slack, that's SaaS. These are pieces of software that do services, and there's things that are different about how it works, how you buy it, how you use it, how you share it, but deep down it's software that does a thing that you need. That's SaaS.
And in the research space, SaaS is a new model versus the existing traditional model. So my first question is, how much do you talk even about the existing or the traditional model, and how do you convert customers to thinking about research as a subscription versus research as a one-off project?
There's two overall trends happening in SaaS in res tech. There's SaaS equals automation. I think that's trend one, where it's automation of existing established activities or services, automating projects, things like standardized ad tests, link tests, things that can be done again and again and again. And the whole proposition of SaaS there is to make it better or faster or cheaper. And I think from my perspective, it definitely makes things faster to start, faster to execute because of the automation. Does it make it better? Sort of. It makes things more consistent and more comparable. You have less human error. You have more automation of tasks. But yet also it does make things more commoditized and movable. Suddenly, if everyone can come up with the same template, that template can be moved around. And there's a lot more competition where there used to be, real IP. Better, faster, cheaper. Does it make it cheaper? I think slightly. We see that SaaS, where SaaS equals automation, things are slightly cheaper, but I see it a bit like alcohol-free spirits, in that alcohol-free spirits often sell at a very similar price point to the actual alcohol-included spirits they're trying to replace.
Right.
And at some stage, someone's going to realize that most of the cost of the alcohol is in the tax, and that the price point for the alcohol-free spirits shouldn't be anywhere close to it. So I think while we've seen automation of existing services get better, a bit faster and a bit cheaper, I think the cost will start to compete to a much lower point. There will be a race to a lower point. And if it's not now, then it's coming. And I think it's more of an expression of buyers, ill discipline around willingness to pay. It used to cost me X, this is 10% cheaper. In reality, automation makes it probably 90% cheaper to actually produce. And so I think we'll see a lot more SaaS automation of existing stuff, but the dynamics of it will evolve very differently. On the flip side, I think there's a second SaaS trend in ResTech. So the first one was SaaS equals automation. The second one, I think, is SaaS equals new propositions. That's taking ResTech, taking research to new buyers, new needs, and building new products. The challenge is this is really difficult. There aren't buyers out there for it. No one knows that they need this. It's very hard to build because no one's done it before. We're trying to reach new buyers. We're trying to do what they need. They often don't know what that is. And it requires completely new approaches to marketing, completely new tech, and completely different people who haven't done res before. More tech than res rather than res with tech added. And I think those are the two kind of trends I see. SaaS equals automation and SaaS equals new propositions. But both of those, I think, are expanding the market and making things better for many types of buyers.
So it's pretty clear, at least in my mind, how speed and automation and improvement of quality through reduction of error, those seem to be very straightforward values to the customer. How does that translate in how they approach the change of behavior, or at least change of purchasing, going from, well, I would like to get pricing done on a one-off basis, on an every single project basis, versus I'm going to sign up for maybe an annual subscription for research?
Yeah, I think this is the real challenge of SaaS, in that in world of legacy research, or the way research is done now and in the past, it is a project thing. Each idea is a tender. Those often, I'm characterizing here, but those often live in emails and Word docs and phone calls.
Yep.
That doesn't naturally lend itself to end up in a SaaS tool. SaaS tools are built to be bought online using credit cards on a subscription basis. So on the one hand, trying to convert existing services into an automated world, you kind of need to converge with the existing buying process. Then again, if we're in the second thing, which is SaaS equals new propositions, new technologies can define the rules. You define the buying process, and the challenge is to make that buying process attractive enough and usable enough for enough people that they can actually go out and do it. The example I always use is Alibaba. So Alibaba makes buying stuff from lots of different suppliers easy. In theory, it's really easy. If you want to buy 20 slushy machines for your restaurant network, you can get 20 different quotes from 20 different manufacturers, and you can compare them. And all it takes is 20 emails, and all it takes is reading 20 PDFs and comparing them and figuring out which currency and which jurisdiction you're going to do and does the shipping contain. Oh wait, it's much more complicated than it looks.
Yeah.
Alibaba makes that a couple of clicks, just like Amazon. So I think that the joy is in making it simple, and tech is a great way to do that. Hence, SaaS equals all sorts of new things. But to answer your question, is it about moving existing processes? I think yes for automation, no for new propositions.
Well, I wonder if many customers realize how much time and energy they're spending on the procurement process. Meaning, are you actually getting a better value by sending all the emails versus a more automated, easier, click-based solution. Because I see that time and time again, even in our own business, not for the research side, but where we might get multiple RFPs, and then suddenly we're spending all of our time trying to figure it out versus just doing the work. Have we
Yeah.
saved any time or money by trying to save all this time and money?
Yes, if that's possible to show to potential clients up front, they already know if you can do the thing. They already know how you're going to do it, and the RFP's already kind of written itself. And that's a much more convenient buying process for the customer, but it's also much easier to supply. And SaaS gives you a lovely shop window to do this. It's a buying process people are familiar with. It just hasn't really been done that often in the research world before.
Well, I imagine that brands and enterprises have a different approach to SaaS than, say, market research agencies. You find that those two groups react differently to this proposition, or what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, most of our clients are not market researchers or not market research agencies. In fact, very few. So we deliberately build to try to expand the market. Going back to the beginning, I think that's where the opportunity is. That's where we can apply tech the most, and that's where we can do something really big and interesting. And I think the key is matching a software product that people really want to use and a buying process that not only suits the customer but also suits us as a company. And in doing it with a SaaS model, that unlocks all sorts of sources of capital, but also different scoreboards, different benchmarks, different ways of working. Put that all together, it's it's the same problem but put in a completely different space, and one that in my view can be much larger.
So you're finding that this behavioral shift on the brands or enterprises side is more straightforward, more easier for them to adopt than maybe on a research agency side, where the value add from the research agency is the capability of creating a very customized, bespoke, insightful product through survey, whereas the brands and enterprises may be more interested in the iterative, speedy process.
Yeah, and I think we're not really changing behaviors in that in the brand buyers in B2C companies that we work with. It's not a new behavior we're creating. They've always wanted to have more data. They've always wanted to know about competition. They've always wanted to know about new markets and new consumers and new segments and new demographics. They've always wanted to know this. They just haven't had a place to put it before.
Yep.
It's been too hard to start, too hard to do, too hard to RFP, can't be bothered to RFP. Suddenly you create something like Alibaba. I can go out and find that I can buy 20 slushy machines, and it's going to take 10 minutes to discover exactly how. That's just letting them do things they already wanted to do. And I think that's the power of SaaS and new business models, in that it's not necessarily about creating new demand. It's just satisfying things that didn't exist before for reasons that should never have been that way.
So it sounds like on your customer side, there's a strong need for iteration. There's a strong need for speed. How do you balance it from a product standpoint, flexibility in the product so that your customer can do anything versus standardization where it's a very specific process that can be repeated and scaled? How do you manage that process?
Not very well is the answer. In that, it's a constant tension for us and many other SaaS companies. Do you build for everyone, or do you build for something specific? It would be much easier to build the ultimate research tool for eyewear companies in Canada to learn about how to enter the Mexican market. Like, that's a very specific thing, and you could do that really, really well. The thing is, that's quite a small market. And for SaaS, you in general are trying to take a product and put it in a very big market, or in our case, try to expand a very big market by giving it to new people. And it means it does, to a degree, have to be all things to all people. The keys, I think, to make it not feel so daunting, either daunting for us to build or daunting for clients to buy, to try and build this thing that does everything, that's, to a developer or a marketer, that's kind of an impossible challenge. And to show a client, here's a thing that does everything you've ever dreamed of, they immediately wonder, like, oh, that sounds great, and good luck with that. To make it specific and to make it do the thing that you want as if by magic and appear simple, I think that's the art. And we're out there trying to do this, but it's hard to do. And no one is doing it particularly well, including us.
Well, you seem to be doing something well because you're growing at a very rapid pace globally, and you're seen as a leader in this agile research part of ResTech. So something is working, even though it's a challenge to get it right and to scale.
Well, thank you, appreciate that. But I think if you round our market share of the opportunity to the nearest number, it's zero. So there's that as well. In that, if the global research industry is an $80 billion market, plus minus all sorts of
Yeah.
bells and whistles, and it can and should be 10 to 25 times larger, the opportunity is absolutely vast. So I think it's only when we have far more people satisfying their curiosity and everyday needs far more often, I think that's when we start to declare victory on what a test is doing and how ResTech as a category and as an industry should be so much larger.
Well, that's where I think people who are looking at this industry miss the mark because they'll take that $80 billion number and they'll do some math on it and say, well, the market size is this. And that's true if you're talking about individuals that are researchers or know they do research and are in process with the traditional methods. And that shows a certain size TAM and a certain growth opportunity, et cetera. But the reality is that human curiosity only grows as people have their questions answered. And literally, as that access changes, as both of our firms are really focused on how do you make it really simple and easy for anyone to have, as you said, their curiosity engaged. I try to say that the TAM of our opportunity is the sum of all human curiosity, not what the current researchers are doing.
What's interesting is most curiosity never makes it into an RFP. It's probably under 1%, it's probably less than 0.1% of things that could and should be tested ever make it into an RFP. So if you're supporting and supplying RFPs, great, because that's the existing market.
Yep.
I think the opportunity is in everything else because there's so much more that B2C companies, B2B companies in every single country around the world wish they knew. And it's our obligation as a ResTech industry to make that possible. You make it possible by making it easy to start, easy to do, all these magic things. But RFPs is probably not going to move the needle.
That is a great way of looking at it. Every bid or RFP that you might receive in research represents only a fraction of the curiosity of your customer, only a limited bit of their actual business needs, their actual business questions, or individual personal questions. Like literally, curiosity is so much bigger than what actually lands through a corporate RFP process through procurement. That is the difference between what our market share is possible today versus what it could be in the future. That's a great.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I love the research industry. I respect it very deeply, and it does amazing things. The thing is that there should be so many more amazing things that are done, and it's limited by things like RFPs. It's limited by things like existing methodologies, expectations, how projects are run. We need to change all of these things in order to satisfy all of the demand that can exist, and that's the opportunity that's out there for ResTech.
That just gets me excited because we've seen it time and time again at Lucid, where as we make things simpler, as we reduce barriers to execution, and as we support more companies, like in a test as an example, the volumes of curiosity fulfilled continue to grow and grow faster than anyone thinks is even possible. So I get excited about it because that's the vision of what is possible that really drives me and I think the ResTech community to continue to build new products and new services.
Yeah, and we saw what happened with Qualtrics even in the last week. This idea that you can do this more and that it's a very valuable thing is clearly a popular one right now. Qualtrics is a 19-year-old company. It has always been tech at the heart, but it's become far more tech recently. I think Qualtrics is just the first of many companies we'll see go through such different valuation journeys, different ownership journeys, and different development journeys. And with SaaS business models being a more popular go-to-market model now, and the availability of the different components that make a SaaS business model possible, I think we can compress that 19 years down to a year or two, in our case, 5 years, to get to quite interesting positions in the world. The key is to keep it simple for clients, and that's what helps expand the market. Everything else follows.
Yep. So thinking about the ResTech industry, and how SaaS plays and what SaaS means, why is it important for the industry that SaaS becomes a larger part of the building block, a larger part of the overall story for the industry? What makes that so important, you think?
Yeah, I don't think SaaS will replace existing research services and professionals, in that I think there will always be a brilliant time for true expertise, human touches. There are some things that simply don't fit into a SaaS model, or simply things that are better with people involved and deep expertise and agencies involved. What SaaS makes possible is probably two groups of things. One is a completely different buying process for customers, a way that they can just pick up the ability to act upon a whim or an idea off the shelf, and they can start that, in our case, in under 90 seconds. Suddenly that is possible when previously it would take many emails a couple of weeks or a couple of days, and it is too hard to start. The other thing is it brings in all sorts of new capital and technology into an industry where it was probably lacking before. It's great to be a self-funded company which is profitable and you can grow at a very steady rate. To jump straight to warp speed, you can do the Qualtrics thing and take in a whole bunch of external capital and do 10 years of progress in 10 weeks. You just need a whole bunch of money to do it. And that capital is available for more tech-enabled and more SaaS business models. If we put those two things together, it's a very different genesis of a company type. It's far less research agency. It's far less about projects. It's about taking tech and a whole bunch of capital and trying to throw that against a problem until we make it easy enough for clients to buy and unlock that demand that we spoke about earlier. I think that's the key. A secondary benefit of having a SaaS business model is you get all sorts of great benchmarks and scoreboards. You get the ability to know how well you're doing. It's kind of like playing a sport. How well am I doing? What does good look like for a SaaS business model, whether it does research or telecommunications? Right. And it also brings you back higher revenue quality, better than winning a project once off and then competing again to win it tomorrow, or better than having a tender that lasts a year to have the chance to do many projects, is something that recurs annually, like a cell phone contract. It's a much more stable revenue, and it's a much better foundation for growth. Put all those things together, it's a very different formation of a company. It's a very different proposition. And it gets you to these questions like, how big can this be? If we can make it easy, how big can this industry be? How can we make this scale like a company like Shopify comes out of Canada, takes over the world, lets you hire more people at a faster rate? But put this all together, it's a completely different approach to addressing the same underlying business need. And that's what helps us unlock more stuff.
As you're speaking to it, I have to imagine that we're all seeing a tremendous increase of interest from what I call the investment community, as they see the opportunity to not only scale within the industry, but even broader as the addressable market grows. I imagine you're also seeing a lot more interest from the investment community in your business.
Yes, I think it's part of the attraction in that if you can create a very large market and you can do it using a product that today could serve that very large market if only everyone was aware that we existed, that becomes a very attractive investment. And that's what lets us bring in new capital to have a much larger team than we should at this stage of our company's growth, a much larger tech stack that is far more advanced than we could afford if we were just paying for it out of our own revenue. So bringing in new sources of capital helps us take kind of giant leap forwards. It's like a warp drive for a company. Yep. In return, it does kind of set the rules you need to play by. So it's not all free money and go for it. There are standards to uphold. So shareholders expect various returns. We need to have different growth rates, hiring different people. In the world right now, people who work in SaaS are extremely expensive because we're not the only ones who are going after this whole software thing. It turns out it's quite popular everywhere, particularly in the US. So it comes with a different territory. And I kind of think about it as different sports. Research services is like climbing a Howell Mountain, climbing Everest. You need a team of Sherpas, plenty of oxygen, and you spend your days worrying about changes in the weather. Research tech and SaaS is much more like esports. You can build a tournament in an hour. You can play Madden or FIFA all the way through to $1 million Counter-Strike tournaments. It's very diverse. It happens in many places. Both are very valuable. Qualtrics, 25 billion. Twitch, 15 billion in value sold to Amazon. So it's possible to move between these things, but I think research services is on a very different cycle in terms of both evolution, but also capital to research tech and SaaS, which is a different sport, a different game, and plays by completely different rules.
I think it's going to be very interesting over the next 12 months or so as the reality of unicorn valuations in the res tech space become obvious. not only to, say, potential investors who are going to want to put more money in more companies, but also to the employees and the companies themselves who are now thinking about what they do in a very different manner. Some people may say that multiples are too high or too hot right now globally, not just for ResTech. But there's this moment with the Qualtrics IPO and others where suddenly there's a realization that ResTech is a thing and that it is really going to have a profound impact on people's lives and the companies that they're leading.
And I think the joy is it's much faster to build companies now. Markets and revenue moves faster now. The ability to attack these problems is easier now. And it's a great time to enter this market and to do interesting things. And there's plenty of space for many different players to do it. $80 billion market that should be 20 times larger or more. Lots of space for many unicorn companies in there. I think the key is to make it easy and think about what clients want. That's the genesis of everything, and I think that's what will define the winners and losers from this opportunity.
If you look at the more service-oriented or tech-enabled services companies, what advice or what kind of thinking would you give to them about how to approach SaaS companies like yourself, or building their own capabilities internally? Is that a dialogue you're currently into, or how do you think about that particular challenge?
It's not a dialogue I'm really into, in that we were born as a SaaS company, and this is because we don't sell to the clients or compete with those service companies at all.
Right.
It's not really a trend that I follow. Then again, I did study in the class with Clay Christensen, the kind of inventor of the term disruptive innovation. Not the inventor of the idea, but he's very good at describing it. That basically tells us that there will always be a time where research services exist. People, 30 years ago, people said that retail bank branches would no longer exist 10 years from now. That's 20 years out of date, and we still have plenty of retail bank branches, and many people love using them. Like, declaring the end of an industry, I think, is a terribly dangerous game to play, because there is a real need for research services. You need expertise. You need humans to create things. You need people to advise you how to do things. You need past experience and pattern recognition to do things well. Some of those things can be replaced by software. Some of those can't. So I think what we'll see is more specialism in research services. Many things, to my point earlier, can be automated. SaaS equals automation. We can automate some of those tasks and do more of it, or do it more consistently. The bigger opportunity in my mind is doing more things because of tech. And I think that's a completely different category. So for anyone who's in a research services business, I think it's time to think about becoming a true specialist and celebrating the human touches, the expertise, the true value that is created by having a great research service or agency. Because I think the things that can be automated and standardized, that will go away. And to my point earlier, that will probably race away to a bottom where it will be a small marginal cost and small gross margin basis. What's interesting and completely different is taking a completely new model and reinventing how this works and who we're selling it to, why they buy it, how they buy it, and what they use it for. And if the demand is already there, the opportunity kind of writes itself. And that's the exciting thing about ResTech happening right now.
Well, I look for a scenario where the overall insights, data, or let's call it the curiosity industry that ResTech is really trying to scale and grow and make more accessible, that as curiosity becomes easier to solve, that not only will the technology companies grow and scale, but also the services companies, because there'll be more opportunities. That 1% of RFPs will now be 1% of a much larger pie versus a pie. And so there's really an opportunity for us all to grow together, versus I know there's a constant theme and concern by some of the more services-oriented companies that the tech firms will be the ultimate growers here versus the other way around. And so my goal is to grow the pie versus fight over fixed pieces.
Completely agree. Much easier to expand the pie, and then everyone can have a big piece. I just do think that the services industry and the more tech approaches will evolve at very different rates, different sources of capital, different business models. One will naturally be smaller, stable, consistent, and I think that will continue. There is a lot of value to be had there. That's the existing market. The thing that will grow faster and have a lot more volatility, but potentially is the bit that's expanding the pie the fastest, is the more tech-enabled and software route. SaaS is just one thing to call it, like it's a SaaS business model, but what matters is the proposition to clients and what it lets them do. That's what adds value, and that's in the end what will create value for companies, investors, and most importantly, clients.
Well, before we move on to our final thoughts and questions, is there anything else about SaaS, its impact on the industry and the evolution of your business that you want to bring to the table?
We spoke a few weeks back about, how do you learn about SaaS? How do you, if you're interested in learning more about SaaS, how do you learn more about it? If you're building a SaaS company, how do you do it better? And there's a couple of things that I like to read. So I love to read things from SaaStr, SaaStr, Jason Lemkin. He's kind of the ultimate high priest of SaaS, and he talks about things. If you read his tweets for a month, suddenly you can speak the language and you start to know what good looks like.
Yep.
Silicon Valley sets great standards. London sets great standards for what investors look like. If you start to read what investors are looking like, that's the rule book and the definitions for what it takes to be kind of an elite SaaS player. And if you can learn those definitions and demands, then suddenly you have a good appreciation for the sport and the rules. Two other great things. One is to read SaaS company filings and documents, particularly when they go public or even when they register or make releases. There's quite a few public SaaS companies well outside, almost all of them are outside ResTech. Read a few of those, what they report on, what they emphasize as mattering, what they are valued on. Like that starts to define what a great SaaS company looks like and how they measure themselves. Big thing about SaaS is measurement and continuous improvement. And the last thing is to read original investor presentations from great SaaS companies. If you go back, you can look on tools like SlideShare and see the original pitch deck for the first investment round from Airbnb, the first investment round from Cloudflare, the first investment round from CrowdStrike, from ServiceNow. You can read these and you can see where the idea came from and how they're going to go about it. And in there is the set of ideas that could maybe set you on a path that lets you hit some of this opportunity and lets you do the thing you've always wanted to do with a SaaS business model, which now is a great time to do that.
We really appreciate you sharing those resources and ideas. The glorious thing about building a business today, even from scratch, is that the resourcing, the metrics, the improvement, the knowledge base is just so much bigger than it's ever been before. And the access to capital is easier and more straightforward than it's ever been before. So a lot of times people get daunted by wanting to start, but it really is day one for the internet, as Amazon and Bezos have said time and time again. The opportunities for what's in front of us are tremendous, both in ResTech and beyond.
Yeah, and I think, as we move towards not just more software, but a much bigger opportunity, it does mean new buyers and new buying processes. And I do think we'll see terminology and complexity melt away. What is sample? As a CMO of a big brand or company, what is sample and why do I care about it? It's probably a word I haven't heard before. And when I do hear about it, it makes me very confused. What is a total unduplicated reach and frequency turf methodology? I mean, talking to someone in the research world, they know what that means, turf. But to someone else, it sounds like you're smoking crystal methodology. It's completely mental. Like, I think these are the ideas and vernacular that needs to disappear. And I think tools like software and SaaS help us do this. You need to make it simple to pick up and buy off a shelf in a website. You can make it self-guided. You don't need to talk to a person. You can just start. It needs to look simple and be easy, but also magically do that thing that you need to know. Very, very hard to build. But I think as the research world and the world of ResTech moves towards more software, we'll see a change in not only the definitions and words and metrics, but also a change in what matters and how buyers think about it and how we talk to buyers. And I think that leads to a much larger market, but also a huge shift in the basis of competition. The existing market will be completely fine, but the opportunity is out there for many, many more things.
I'm thrilled about the future. Excited to have you here, but I want to move to our last three questions, which are not about necessarily ResTech or SaaS or anything. Just the standard three that I go with to close out one of these interviews. The first one is, what was your first job, and what about it do you continue to use today?
So my first real job was in McKinsey. So I was a small child with a biology degree and a laptop, trying to walk into big businesses and help them with problems that they couldn't solve themselves. It was quite a high hurdle, and the thing that sticks with me from that time was that what I just said sounds absolutely impossible. You can't walk into a big building and meet the CEO of a huge company who's world famous and believe that you can tell them something useful. But if you hit it with the right set of logic and you challenge some assumptions and you ask some questions that they never asked before and you bring some ideas that they never thought of before, suddenly some really obvious stuff emerges. And all of these things are conquerable and defeatable.
Yep.
And I think in ResTech world, that just means some of the long held assumptions about how things do work or should work, those are the things to break next. Deep down, we probably don't need those things. So the thing that sticks with me most from McKinsey is challenging assumptions and a sense of obligation to go out and find new ideas and to pursue them. Sometimes be right, sometimes be wrong, but all of that is progress.
An obligation to pursue new ideas. That's a great lesson from any job. What is the best bit of hard feedback you've ever received, maybe at McKinsey or somewhere else, that really challenged your assumptions about yourself?
It was the time when I was going to start leading my first team, the first time where I was in charge of a whole project, and I didn't really know what to do. I felt like that kid with the laptop walking into the building again. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I've kind of seen a lot of this, but suddenly I'm in charge. What do I do? And I got a really good bit of advice, which was trust your instincts. And I thought at the time, and the person who told me that literally said that and walked off. I was like, this is either, yeah. And I was like, what? And I thought at the time, this is either the best piece of advice or the worst piece of advice I've ever received.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out to be the best, because they didn't mean your instincts are right and that you're going to be right first time. What they meant was start your journey of learning for yourself. If you do what you instinctively think is right, you will start improving your instincts sooner. You will start to fail and learn at a faster rate than ever before. And if you look at all of the things that you could do, and then you trust your instincts about where to look next, you will start to turn on a fire hose of learning that you didn't have before. And if you're adapting your instincts rather than constantly using frameworks, then you are making yourself better, not just your external thought process better. And I went back and asked him 10 years later, is that what you meant? He was like, yeah, but if I said it that way, you probably wouldn't have done it. So you're welcome. And I was like, I owe that person quite a lot. They now work for Walmart in India, and that's quite exciting. So Sam Agarwal, a huge thanks.
Well, it sounds like Sam put you on a journey to really try to hone and learn about your instincts. When I hear trust your gut, I don't often think of that as let's say, a muscle that can be refined and improved over time. So I appreciate that bit of feedback as well, because I probably myself need to work on how to make my instincts better or learn more about them and how to improve, because you can look at data and analysis all you want, but at the end of the day, you have to make decisions that are more gut level than data driven sometimes.
Yeah, and I think to use kind of US sports analogies, there's practice reps and then there's game time reps. And in trying to improve your decision making is through the power of logic, is practice reps. That's time in the gym. Great work, great exercise. But game time reps, that's what will let you, run a spin move around a defender, and make it look like a flash. Things that you don't decide using thought, things that are quite instinctive. And the more game time reps you have, the better you're going to be in those situations. And that's what wins you Super Bowls. And this person's advice was get game time, is really what he said.
Wow. Okay. I'm gonna have to spend more time digesting that myself. The final, I'm serious. That's a big question, especially for leaders and CEOs. The last question is, what's the most important thing you learned from your mother?
Trying to be articulate. So my mum was a diplomat. She's from Arizona originally, but moved to the UK before I was born. And I think the power of being articulate and the ability to fit into many places. So as a person with a British accent who has 2 American parents, an Australian wife, and who worked in many, many different exotic places, the ability to change language, to change style of speech and complexity, and to adapt it to many different audiences, and to try to fit into many different environments, and be a friend, be useful, and try to bring what you've got, but for maximum effect in context. I think that's a real skill of diplomats and diplomacy. And that's something that I think I'd really tried to pick up from my mum. Pair that with working in McKinsey and being thrown into the deep end in many of those situations and having to do a new one every 1 to 3 months forever. Yep. It's quite a fun set of pattern recognition to have. But I think that's something I originally learned from her, which was to think about the context you're in, to try to bring the best that you've got, but in the way that's most effective where you are now. And that, running into a kindergarten and talking about strange computer science and particle physics is not going to be very useful. But if you can talk about Big Bird and atoms and how they make up the world, suddenly everyone learned something, and that's quite fun. So probably that's the biggest one amongst many, many others.
So it sounds like for you, articulate is about self-awareness and being able to understand the audience and bridge the gap.
Yeah, I think articulate is not about being complex or having delivery like Benedict Cumberbatch, the greatest. I think it's the exact opposite of those. It's about being... Yeah, thank you. It's about being not complex, and it's about having maximum impact, not maximum complexity or maximum effect.
What's interesting is how articulation is also the theme of a test, of making something that could be considered important through complexity very, very simple for the audience that you're with.
We try, in that research is a very complex thing to even think about. It's very hard to embark on many research type projects. It's hard to think what you want to test. It's hard to figure out how to reach your audience. It's hard to process data. Very few people have skills to do one of those bits well, let alone put them together and, draw a conclusion out of that. And when it takes, weeks or months to even start and finish those, it's quite limited in what it can do. It's a very beautiful thing when it's done well, but because it's so complex, it's not done as often as it should be. And I think it's redacting that complexity, not removing it, just hiding it, only showing that it's complex in a series of individual decisions that people can actually make, making it look like it's easy to start, because it can be easy to start. It doesn't need to be daunting. And I think the future of res tech and the future of research is in making things easier for more people, and that's the power of SaaS, and that's how we bring this all together.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. It's been remarkable to have you on this episode of Through the Looking Glass. I was speaking with Seema Vasa, who has her own podcast series, and she said that she started to understand that the value of doing these is for her what she learns. And I can truly say that you've challenged me as a leader and as a thinker through this conversation. I really want to thank you for that. And I've also learned to rethink about what the word articulate could actually mean versus what I might have thought in the past. So thank you for that as well. But we've been joined here with the very charming and capable Mr. Jeremy King, the founder and CEO of Attest, a leader not only in SaaS, but in res tech, and making the research world far more simple for all of us to be able to use. So thank you again for joining us today.
And thank you very much for having me. Thank you for listening. And, to build on what you said, we learn a huge amount from you in reciprocity. And thank you for your partnership.
Amen. Amen.
Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. For information on ResTech, our complete list of episodes, and more, visit luc.id/lookingglass.